So far this offseason, I've really only talked about how to handle first round rookie picks, trading for them, trading them away, but I thought it was about time to dig a little deeper into those second and third round rookie picks. So we're going to take a look at where the dynasty market stands on these picks right now. And then today I'm going to talk about some players I'd like to be trading those picks away for, and follow that up with another video basically doing the opposite. Which players would I actively be trading away to acquire more seconds and third round picks? My name is Paul. This is Pure Potential. If you enjoyed today's video and you want to catch the next one as well, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and leave a like, leave a comment as well, and let's get into this one. All right, so in previous videos, I kind of went pick by pick through the entire first round, and I gave advice for each individual pick slot. I am not going to be doing that today because number one, it would take forever. And number two, the value gap between these picks just kind of starts to shrink and shrink more as you go down the board. A lot of the advice would be redundant because honestly, managers are going to start viewing these picks pretty similarly, or at least grouping them into tiers, kind of like early second, mid second, late second. So here's what we're going to do instead. I went over to fantasycalc.com, great website. It has dynasty rankings that are generated and updated based on actual completed dynasty trades. And I grabbed all the names that are being valued around and in between all of the second and third round rookie picks. I typed those up, and we're just going to go ahead and look at the entire second round at once. I'm going to give my overall thoughts. I'll highlight some individual players that I like in that range, and then we'll move on to the third round and do the exact same thing. Okay, so here we go. This is where all of these second round rookie picks fit into the overall player rankings over on Fantasy Calc. And these rankings are based on 12-team leagues, Superflex, PPR, non-tight end premium. And my initial impression here is I don't really want most of the players here at this opportunity cost. It's just not a time of year that I'm really concerned about positional needs. I'm not trying to go out and get specific running backs or wide receivers that I can plug into my lineup in week one, because week one is a long, long way off. And it's unlikely that most of these guys are going to gain any value between now and then. In fact, a lot of the players on this list are probably going to lose value when the NFL draft rolls around. I'd say a lot more players here are going to lose value than gain value because there's not a lot of elite producers here. The ones that could fit that category, like a Devontae Adams, are older players. So there's just not a lot of room to grow. You know, look at someone like James Conner, for example, sitting there between the 205 and the 206. I think that's a pretty reasonable value for him, but I'm also not really inclined to go and make that exact trade right now. You know, even if I need a running back, because nothing's going to happen in the next month that is going to make James Conner more valuable. The Cardinals already have Trey Benson on the team, so the market certainly isn't factoring in any kind of like risk that they add a running back. If anything, I'd say the risk they add a running back is probably higher than the market thinks. So he's not going to get any more expensive in the next month or probably ever. So if your league mate is telling you right now they'll trade you James Conner for the 205, I assure you they will still do that on draft day. And at that point, you're going to have a lot more information. You're going to know what player is available at that pick. You know, whether that's still a range in the draft that you like. Individual trade opportunities, they can come and go. Certain managers can get cold feet. They can change their mind. But we're not talking about cream of the crop elite assets here. If you can't get a James Conner, you can go get somebody else. I think it just comes back to something that Jacob Sanderson actually said on a recent episode of Dynasty Points that I think is really helpful, something to keep in mind, is if you're trading a rookie pick, you should be pretty confident that that is the best return you are going to get between now and whenever you're on the clock, because otherwise you're really just being impatient when you hit accept on that trade. In reality, holding on to the flexibility and the liquidity of that pick is going to serve you better in the long run. Anyway, let's get back to the picks here. I promised we were going to talk about actual players that I would trade these picks away for, and there are some of those. So let's start near the top. And we're looking at this early second range. I actually think this range of rookie drafts is going to have some high upside bets. I am rising on the 201 pick, the 202 pick, because I'm looking at like Jackson Dart potentially getting first round draft capital. You have Luther Burden. He's getting pushed down. The Matthew Golden hype is surging. He's probably going to have a higher ADP than Burden, even though I kind of prefer Burden as a prospect. Colston Loveland could fall, especially in non-tight end premium. He's a great prospect. Caleb Johnson, or whoever that like fifth running back off the board is, probably going to be a round 2 or early round 3 pick that's going to have a good amount of upside. So I just think if you're sitting at 201 or 202, I think you should be pretty excited that you're going to get a really good player there. And, I like Devontae Adams. I like David Njoku. I like some of these guys, even Jerry Jeudy. I'm not looking to trade those very early seconds for them right now. I just think if you're trading those picks, you need to be pushing up into the next range, because I almost view them as an extension of the late first right now. And maybe that's risky. Maybe we get a bunch of really bad landing spots, but it just, when I'm sitting there counting the names of players that I want to be invested in, I'm not stopping at 12. I'm getting to 14, 15. So I want those picks. Now, I do still like these players. So what I would say, if you want to get into an Adams, an Njoku, Geno Smith, these are guys worth rostering. I would go down a little bit, maybe 205, 206 range. See if you can throw on a bench player, throw on a future third round pick or something, and then you can maybe get access to those players without giving up the high upside rookie pick. Maybe that doesn't work. I think it's worth trying. Moving further down the list, there is a name that immediately caught my eye when I was typing this up, and you can probably guess who it is if you pause the video and look. It's Josh Downs. Sitting here just ahead of the 204. I think that's egregious. I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that in my video from a week or two ago where I was talking about trading first round picks away for players, I think I really overshot the mark when I picked Josh Downs as my 112 target. I don't necessarily think he's fallen in value since then. Nothing's really changed for him, but these rookie picks, they just keep rising. And in hindsight, I think moving the 112 for him was definitely not the move right now. Just not necessary. Still a great player, a guy that I'm very high on. He's 23 years old. He's super talented. We saw it last year when he got to play with Flacco. Matt Harmon absolutely loves him. I think he has him like wide receiver 18 or something in his rankings. He's going to be freed from Anthony Richardson sooner than later, and I do believe that he has upside. But just looking at where he's valued right now, you clearly do not have to move first-round picks for him. I actually got him after the 204 in my most recent Dynasty Startup draft. Long story short, I am trading a 203 or a 204 pick for Josh Downs. I am totally comfortable doing that. I think that gets you kind of past those super high upside prospects, and you're probably looking at more of like, okay, do I want Jaden Higgins or Josh Downs? Do I want Trey Harris or Josh Downs? I'm probably just going to go with the young, proven good wide receiver over those day two wide receivers with some clear red flags in their profile. So that's where I would stand on Downs. And then for me, moving further down this list of players, it's going to be some of the usual suspects, guys that I'm pretty sure I've talked about on this channel, but I'm going to talk about them again because they're really some of the only guys here that I think are worth investing in pre-NFL draft. I think Jakobi Meyers and Jauan Jennings both stick out. They're both sitting in between the 207 and the 208 in these fantasy calc rankings. Jakobi Meyers just perpetually underrated. It seems like he comes out every year and scores 12, 13, 14 points per game. And when other wide receivers do that, when they're still relatively young, they get pushed up. But for some reason, when Meyers does it, he just sits here in this exact range each and every year. Now, he is getting a little bit older, but he's still just 28. And, he had another solid season in 2024, 13.6 points per game, playing with Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew and Desmond Ridder. Not an efficient passing game by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe they add to the wide receiver room this offseason, and that hurts Jakobi Meyers, but upgrading to Geno Smith at quarterback probably offsets that a bit. And he's just a useful player that gets targets. He's always gotten targets no matter where he's been, who's been on the team. I just see Meyers at this mid to late second round price as a guy that's probably going to give you 80 to 90% of the production that you're hoping to get from Jordan Addison or DK Metcalf or Terry McLaurin. And I'm just a fan of that bet. I would rather swing this pick where the upside of a 207 pick is just a lot lower than like a late first that you would have to pay for those other players. So I'd rather make that bet on Meyers, especially in like a start 10, start 11 format where I know I'm going to have some flex guys that I need to fill in. I'm going to need a little bit more depth. He seems like a perfect target. And Jauan Jennings, very much the same archetype of player where you're not going to get the super duper high ceiling with him. But you look at last year, which was kind of an unusual breakout season for him in like year 4, year 5 of his career. You take out week 6 where he left early with an injury, he was at 14.8 points per game. I mean, that is a very useful wide receiver, and I don't see things getting worse for him in 2025. Deebo Samuel is in Washington. Brandon Ayuk could be a non-factor for most of the year or even all of the season. We don't know yet. It's really just George Kittle, Ricky Pearsall, and Jauan Jennings, and I know people want to manifest the breakout second year for Pearsall, but I think more likely than not, it's Kittle and Jennings that are going to lead this team in targets next year. So I see him very similarly to Meyers, and I have been investing in him pretty heavily as well. And then the last name I'll point out here in the second round is going to be Jaylen Warren. He's sitting here behind the 210, and somehow Xavier Legette and Jonathan Brooks and Tank Bigsby. I had to double check and make sure that was correct. It almost feels impossible that that's like a real thing that's happening in real leagues. I really don't know what we're doing here because Jaylen Warren is more talented than most of the running backs that are listed ahead of him in these rankings. And he arguably has similar or better job security than all of them because the Steelers chose to retain him over Najee Harris. They didn't even try to bring back Najee, even though he didn't even get much money. Now the Steelers don't have a second round pick because they traded it for DK Metcalf. So unless the Steelers are going round one running back, which I guess is possible, but I really don't see happening. If they don't go round one running back, the worst case scenario for Warren is that he's competing with a third rounder. And honestly, if it's Dylan Sampson, if it's Bashal Tutin, if it's DJ Giddens that are coming to Pittsburgh, I think Warren is going to win that battle. And I think at worst, he's going to be a prominent part of a committee backfield. Even that for the price of 210 seems fine. So I think this is one of the rare occasions where, first of all, if the Steelers don't draft it back, he is going to gain value. So this is a guy where the buy window could actually close very quickly. And I think it is an asymmetrical bet where the downside doesn't really feel much lower than this. Like Warren had a role for years with Najee Harris where he was at least startable in fantasy. I don't see that going away just with how the team has talked about him, how they've tried to retain him. So I think the downside here is basically non-existent. I think the upside is significant. I would love to acquire Jaylen Warren for anything close to this price. All right, we're going to move on to the third round picks here. And this is actually a much shorter list. As the gaps between each pick get compressed, you can actually see these little pockets where 307, 8, and 9 are all basically valued the same. 3, 10, 11, 12 basically valued the same. So the difference between these picks is shrinking, and that's how it should be because the hit rates are not noticeably different depending on where you are in the third round. It's really not even that much different than the fourth round, to be honest with you. But looking at this list, I think right off the bat, you could be tempted by some of these young handcuff running backs, players like Isaac Orendo, Jalen Wright, Kendre Miller. I think these guys can be tempting where maybe you want to go and send a third round rookie pick for one of these guys because it feels like a bit of a known commodity. You know that they are in high value backfields. If the starter gets hurt, they can step in and produce. The problem with that for me is that any of these players could be replaced in the NFL draft. There are just too many good running backs in this class. You know, outside of the top 5 that everybody knows are good, you have Bashal Tutin, you have Cam Scatabo, Dylan Sampson, DJ Giddens, RJ Harvey, Damian Martinez. It goes down and on and on and on. You have these pass catching specialists like Jaden Blue and LaQuint Allen. There are so many talented running backs in this class. I think you're going to see a ton of backfields bringing competition, and some of these seemingly attractive backups, like a Jalen Wright, are just going to evaporate. So what I'd rather do, as opposed to investing in these players now, I'd rather keep the thirds, avoid the risk entirely, and then just draft these day 3 prospects that are coming in. They have good profiles. They have all the same type of upside, the ones that are at least landing in fairly open backfields or landing on teams that only have one good running back. Those guys, I think, are going to be sitting in the same position as a Garendo or a Wright. I'm going to be able to get them in the third round of rookie drafts because, again, it's such a deep class. And that just seems more appealing to me than hoping these incumbent running backs survive the draft. So I am not going out for any of those running backs, but there are players here that I think would be worth trading for. The first one I'll point out is actually not on the graphic, but I think in a super flex league, if you're struggling a bit at quarterback, if you can try to trade your 301, 302 pick for Daniel Jones, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. And I can't believe I'm saying it in the year 2025, acquiring Daniel Jones. I just have such little faith that Anthony Richardson is going to make it through the season for the Colts. I think Daniel Jones is probably going to start more than half the games for them. And with his rushing upside that he has, he's going to be a startable fantasy quarterback. So I think that's worth the price of an early third round pick. If you have a need at quarterback, maybe if you actually have Richardson already, you can just say, I have the Colts quarterback for the year for the price of, an early second and an early third. And I'm going to be able to start these two guys in my super flex spot for the season. I think that's fine. Then there are some wide receivers in this range that I like. Christian Kirk going after the 302. I think he's sort of in that Jakobi Meyers, Jauan Jennings world, maybe a little bit lower floor and ceiling than those guys, but kind of a reliable PPR receiver who can give you 12, 13 points per game. At the very least, you can say he's in a good situation. He's going to step into the type of role that we saw from Stephon Diggs last year, playing mostly slot for the Texans with CJ Stroud, really only competing against Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz for targets. Maybe they add a receiver in the draft, but they really need offensive line help. I think that's where the bulk of their draft capital should be going. Kirk strikes me as a player that in a start 10, start 11 league, you could do a lot worse with your third round pick than to land on a guy like Kirk that should be very startable in those leagues. But the real prize here of the whole list, I think, is Jalen Coker. Jalen Coker, no idea how this guy is still sitting all the way down behind the 304, behind Romeo Doubs, behind a lot of players that we know for a fact are just not it. Jalen Coker might be it. He could be really good. I'm not saying that I would bank my career on it. I'm not saying it's the most likely outcome, but I think we saw enough flashes from him as a UDFA in his rookie season. He's sitting on a depth chart that is currently wide open. Maybe they take Tet McMillan. Maybe the Panthers take Tet McMillan in the first round. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. But even if they do, Coker just has to beat out Xavier Legette to have a full-time role on the Panthers offense. And his per route stuff was interesting. His college career was kind of wild as far as being crazy productive at like a nothing school. He went to Holy Cross, I think. I'm intrigued by Jalen Coker. He's a player that I actively want to invest in. And he is someone that has, I think, legit upside here, which is not usually the case. There are a couple other guys that have some upside. I do not like them as much as I like Jalen Coker, but I think Cedric Tillman, potentially worth a flyer in this mid third round range. He was a guy we were very excited about at points last year. I remember when I was updating my dynasty rankings, when he was on that 3-week tear before he got that really weird concussion that kept him out for the whole season. I had pushed him up into that late second range. I just couldn't avoid it. He was dominating targets at such a high rate. He was scoring so many points, and now he's very much an afterthought. And I understand why, because the Browns don't have a quarterback, and the Browns could easily draft a wide receiver that would make Cedric Tillman irrelevant, put him back on the bench. So it's not foolproof, but again, a player where there's upside. I think if you're not swinging for upside with these thirds, you should just keep them. And, maybe this is a ridiculous call out, but I think Dontayvion Wicks, I'm willing to get hurt again. I know the guy can't catch. He has absolute bricks for hands. His separation stuff is insane. If the Packers decide that they want to kind of stick with him, work with this guy, I think hands are fixable. I think he can get better at that. It's hard to teach the type of separation that he has as a wide receiver. And the Packers haven't added anybody. That's the big thing. Christian Watson's going to miss the whole season. They have Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontayvion Wicks. Who knows what they do in the draft, but as it stands today, Wicks is going to be out there a lot for the Packers. And he's sitting here between the 309 and the 310. I'm willing to make that bet. Maybe not every time, but I think there are worse ways that you could spend a third round pick. And then the last guy I'm going to toss out, absolutely not an upside play, exact opposite of an upside play. But if you want the Christian Kirk bet at an even cheaper price and an even older player, how about Keenan Allen, right? Going after the 312, potentially could be gotten for a fourth round pick, and he could sign on a contending team. He's not signed right now, which is probably a big reason that he's all the way down here. He could sign on any contending team with a star quarterback, and the guy is just a possible PPR scam waiting to happen, right? He steps into a slot role where he can run most of the routes. It's not going to be pretty, but he can catch 5-6 passes a game. I wouldn't do it just to do it. I wouldn't do it in every league, But if you're a little thin in a start 10, start 11, in a deeper starting lineup league, I think his value is probably going to go up the second he signs somewhere. And that would not be a terrible investment. Certainly wouldn't be devastating to your roster if it didn't pan out. So could be worth a look. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. That is how I view the second and third rounds right now. Those are some players you could potentially move those picks for in the coming weeks. As always, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you enjoy my Dynasty content, you want to see more of it in the future, please subscribe to the channel. Really goes a long way. And if you're interested in even more content from me, you can become a YouTube member. I just rolled out my pre-draft rookie rankings. Those are going to be updated immediately following the NFL draft. Those are available for YouTube members. You also get access to private channels in the Pure Potential Discord, my regular top 200 Dynasty rankings, and weekly members only live streams where I answer any question you might have about Dynasty, helping you work on your teams, all that kind of stuff. So check it out if you want. There's a link in the description. There's a join button that should be under the video. Either way, I'll be back soon with more Dynasty content, and hopefully I'll see you then.